Thank you very much, Mr. Yanuura, for your good work. And I want to begin by first thanking my good Egmont here, Mr. Adeliogun, for organizing this event. I'm also glad to see another of my Egmonts here, Mogaji Wega Adejuma, who is part of the panel. I can also see one of our big aunties here, Dr. Dosuma Olowo here on the call. So it's great to have this. And I want to thank Mr. Shia Adivision for his opening remarks, which are quite insightful about this historic event of quite, 2 centuries ago. My contribution will be about the strategic direction, what I think should be the strategic direction for the Yoruba nation. So I would leave, much of the commentary on the historical, event to the likes of Mogaji and Mr. Adeliogun. But before I do that, I just want to offer a quick reflection on my own, of course, understanding of this event in the 19th century. I think one thing that struck me here is that the time we had these international wars, among various groups within the Yoruba nation, was also a time of great upheaval in terms of external threat to the integrity of the Yoruba nation. We have, the jihadists who have taken over Ilorin and been a continual thorn in the flesh for the nation. We do remember, that one of the expeditions, to retake Ilorin, suffered great bad reverses earlier on. But we also remember that the Oshogbo War in 1840, in which the Ibadan warriors, play a great and brave role in stopping the onslaught of the jihadists. And it's become a stuff of legends where you have, footmen, stopping, the jihadist cavalry in their tracks. So all of this is interesting because this was a time, and I think this is one of the lessons that is important for us to draw. As much as we reflect on the fact of the history, I think we also are drawing the lessons. That this was a time you expect that the various groupings within Yoruba land will be incentivized by the sheer danger of external threat to the nation, that they will come together. But rather what we saw was this, splintering and these wars, internal wars within the nation. And I think it's a lesson for us to reflect then on what are the things that we can learn so that we forge a new direction in which we bring all our different peoples together, no matter what the differences are. We have a common history. We are shared, the same cultural, and social history. And we, share the same aspirations for the future. And this should be the driving force, the incentive that drives us to move forward. So that's my reflection on that. And that's part of what underpins, my own contribution here. But what I'll be speaking to, and of course, that matters of strategy, there's only so much you can see on here. So I'm going to be a bit sparing and just, addressing myself to those things that we can, of course, discuss, in a public forum like this. And so what I offer then is what I call the Yoruba, strategic diamond, if you like. And there are 4, elements or 4 pillars of that. And the first one is what I call that the Yoruba nation needs a transnational strategy. Part of the tragedy of the colonial, experience is that you have these artificial boundaries that disrupt the natural evolution, of the development of the Yoruba nation state. And so what you have here is this, artificial, geography that has actually upended the natural contiguity of the Yoruba, nation. So you have nowadays, sometimes people think of Yorubas as just in terms of Southwest Nigeria, or in terms of Nigeria, maybe, of course, part of North Central. But I'm urging that first and foremost, we need, as Yorubas, as we look at it, we need to embrace a transnational strategy. We need to jettison this limited and limiting view of the Yoruba Commonwealth by considering the fact that, Yoruba land is not just about Southwest, it's not just about, North Central Nigeria. It's about, indigenous Yoruba communities, like Mr. Yanure also alluded to earlier, in places like Benin Republic, in Togo, in part of Ghana. We are not talking of immigrant communities. We are talking of, indigenous communities here. So that is a key part of this, transnational view of Yoruba Commonwealth. The other part is the enormous number of Yorubas in the diaspora. Some of them as a result of historic of the transatlantic slave trade. So you have communities in places like Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, particularly Haiti, but also, large communities in Cuba, in Brazil, and so on. We need to have a focused and targeted, strategic, agenda that seeks to engage actively with these communities. Not just a kind of lip service, not just on the surface, a focused and strategic agenda to engage with them, to embrace them, to co-opt them, to harness, this enormous, economic and human and cultural capital that are resident, in these indigenous as well as diaspora communities, across the world. And this is important because I'm reflecting on the fact that in 1948, in January 1948, when David Ben-Gurion, who was then, the leader of the Jewish Council, as it was called, then sent Golda Meir, who was the secretary of that council, to the US to raise funds. It was in recognition of the existential, challenge faced by the Jewish nation at that time. And by the time Golda Meir returned in March 19, she returned with 25 million US dollars. And this is what Ben-Gurion said about that. He said, someday when history will be written, it will be said that there was a Jewish woman who got the money which made the state possible. So, of course, I recognize that at the moment, we are not really talking not necessarily about secession or anything like that. We're talking about self-determination. So, this argument does not rely on just, a secessionist agenda. We're talking about self-determination, which is the fundamental article in the United Nations. And I'm saying that we have enormous resources, human, economic, and cultural capital in our transnational, the diaspora community that we are not even tapped into at all. This is a big market in its own, but also there's a lot of things there in terms of tourism opportunities and so on and so forth that can actually spearhead, economic transformation in the Yoruba Commonwealth. I try to use the word Yoruba Commonwealth in order to move away from this, confining, view of Yoruba only within Nigeria, because it's more than that. The second point I'll quickly make is that in addition to this transnational strategy, we also need an aggressive human capital campaign. And I say that because my view is that the biggest battle that we face as a people is not a battle for lands. It is not even a battle for political power. It is a battle for the minds and hearts of people. For every Yoruba who is half educated or uneducated, who has acquiesced, to this, status of being viewed as second-class citizens. For everyone who has that mindset, they represent actually a danger, to our collective aspiration. The minds of our people have long been abused. And we need to embark on a program, on a campaign of reconstructing, of regaining the minds of people to make them believe, on the future in which they are not playing the second fiddle, but they are first class, people in their own right. And so what we need then is an education as well as a re-education campaign that not only open new pathways to knowledge, but also raises and nurtures the consciousness of our people to believe again about what they can be and what we can be collectively. So that is the second part. We need to embrace that strategy of human capital, campaign, raising consciousness. The third one is what I also consider to be urgent, an agrarian revolution. I think right now, majority of us Yorubas, whether in the diaspora or in various urban centers, in Nigeria and beyond, we actually think of our rural communities as a kind of a footnote, as on the periphery of our economic agenda. And that is a fundamentally mistaken notion. Not least because land is a critical resource, of course, an important factor of production, but also because, in these rural communities exist enormous possibilities in terms of what can be, in terms of how, through the use of innovation and technology, we can capture more value, from our agricultural output. I mean, I have conducted research on this for many years, but I'm not going to belabor that because of time. But we can actually raise the productivity of our land by as much as 1,000%, and I'm not making that up. That is 10 times the value of output that we have there at the moment. And when we empower the farmers and people in our rural communities, that is also the most effective way to frontally, address the challenge, the security challenge of, of terrorist headmen who have laid siege, to our rural communities. The fourth and final element of this is also linked, to the agrarian reform, is what I call, an ambitious innovation and industrial strategy. And I think the more we use innovation to drive, agricultural reform and in that sector, the more you're going to see, because you're going to require less labor, if more technology and less labor, and the excess labor can then be co-opted to service other aspects, the non-agricultural aspect of the industrial economy, in terms of manufacturing, services, and so on. So the future is also critically belong to those who are at the cutting edge of innovation and technology. I mean, we see this in a way, at that time, and I'm sure, there'll be reflection on this later on, that even in those days where, there was a battle for economic ascendancy, innovation was at the heart of this. Trade was at the heart of this. In the world now, people are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, about what is called Industry 4.0 and all of that. The Yorubas need to position themselves right at the forefront of that in driving, industrial, revolution, beginning from the Yoruba, Commonwealth and beyond. And I say, finally, that these four elements are mutually reinforcing. So the transnational strategy fits into this aggressive human capital campaign, which fits, into the, need for an agrarian revolution, which fits into an innovation and industrial strategy. All of them are mutually reinforcing, and they are very, very important. So I will hold that now because of time, and hopefully we can have more conversation around that in the Q&A session. So thank you very much once again, Mr. Yanura.